Hey folks, Tom Coy here again for Arbor Shield, episode number 7 or 8, something like that. You would think by now I would know, but my wife's not here to tell me which episode it is, so here we are. In the studio today, we have Lou Morse and John Foster from Bank of Ann Arbor. I kind of messed that up the first time. Unfortunately, Lou caught it in lieu of my wife not being here. Okay. Anyhow, they're from Bank of Ann Arbor, and we're looking forward to the discussion. But before we do that, let's cut to the first clip. I want to show them and our audience on banking.
Thanks for your time.
Very good to be with you, Brian, and good evening.
Now, you're a market economist.
Yes, well, most economists are market economists, Brian, to a degree these days, yes.
How do you think things are going at the moment?
Well, there's a great deal of international concern. I mean, we're taking a toweling, but things will sort themselves out, Brian. This is what a market does.
Well, can you explain to me how it all works?
How the economy works?
Well, yeah, what's the problem at the moment, for instance?
Well, what we've got at the moment is an international credit crisis.
Yes, how does that happen?
Well, I'm a bank, Brian, and I borrow money and I lend it out, and I charge more to the people I'm lending it to than I pay to the people from whom I'm borrowing it.
Well, who do you borrow money from?
Well, from, depositors, Brian. Have you got a dollar?
Well, yeah,
I
sure.
borrow your dollar and I give you, there's your bank balance.
$1?
$1.
Right, okay, and you pay interest to me on that?
I do, but I also charge you fees.
Well, why do you charge me fees?
Because, Brian, I'm looking after your money. Your money is secure with me. I'm a bank. I mean, this is a very important amount of money. This is probably your nest egg. It's safe with us.
And how much interest do you pay me?
Approximately the same as I'm charging you in fees.
Oh, good deal for me.
Well, your money's secure with us, Brian, and I then lend that money to businesses, and those businesses generate income. This is how we build an economy.
Yeah. And they put that income into the bank?
They do, of course, Brian, and that builds the savings pool, and we can invest more money.
Well, who do you lend that to?
Well, to people who need credit, Brian. You see, money creates more money, so if we can create money that creates more money, we're broadening the economy, we're expanding it all the time. Yes.
But shouldn't people just buy the can afford?
You don't need to afford the things you're buying, Brian. You need to afford the interest on the money you need to borrow in order to buy them.
And you're charging higher rates for all this?
We do hop into them a wee bit on the credit rate, Brian. We stick the hydraulics under that because it's a slightly higher risk strategy.
Okay. So I used that clip, and Lou and I talked a little bit about it. John's a bit taken back, but that's okay. No, the reason I use that clip is in discussions with bankers, as I've both indicated to you over the past few years especially, that is how I find that bankers and investors talk. Okay, that is very brief, very confident in what they're saying, and very fast. That's the key, fast. Which reminds me of a segment of 60 Minutes I just saw where they were confronting the CEO on this nonprofit, and he was making, I forget, $500,000 a year or something. And they said, sir, don't you find that salary like really exorbitant considering this is a nonprofit? And he went into this 2-minute dialogue about, well, it's only 0.5% really of what, and he goes into this, and by the time he's done, you're like, what did he just say, even though he didn't answer the question. So I say all that to say, and we've talked a little bit about banking and so forth before they got here, but on a serious note, what we did discuss was, because of the history of banking, as in law enforcement, as in numerous other careers, if you will, there is a level of distrust by the public because of, malfeasance? Is that the right word? I don't know. But anyhow,
you can use
I think I got that from my wife in accounting, actually. But you know what I mean? There is a level of distrust there for things that have happened in both of our industries and others. So anyhow, before we jump into that, maybe you guys could just talk a little bit. We'll start with you, John, in what does a vice president do? I'm ignorant, so what does a vice president do, for the most part, in a bank? What would be your duties?
Vice President of Security? Is that the question?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, exactly,
Perfect.
John. I'm glad you caught me on that.
That's
yes,
okay,
security.
we have a lot of vice presidents. So, security officer, I do not stand there in a uniform and wear a gun and guard the lobby. Mostly I'm looking for fraud, trying to prevent fraud, and now it's more teaching. So, or teaching or communicating with employees as well as customers on current fraud trends and what to do.
Okay. And staying with that, how has that changed let's say in the last 5-10 years? I mean, with regard to security, right? And especially employees, how is that?
Sure.
You know,
5 or 10 years ago, bank security officers, we'd meet with law enforcement, and most of the time we would talk about counterfeit checks. What are you seeing? Who's trying to open an account that shouldn't open an account? Now what we're seeing is you have computer-based fraud, you still have the counterfeit checks, you have debit card fraud, you have credit card fraud, so there's way more fraud than there used to be. So now I used to just email employees, say, okay, watch out for Joe Smith presenting counterfeits. Now, not in addition to employees, I'm emailing all bank employees, not just the front line, to say, watch out for this wire transfer fraud. You know, this is new, it's coming in our area. Maybe a competitor has been hit by it. So to give them a heads up.
okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And Lou, now I ran into Lou at a recent meeting, and as I indicated before our taping, that one thing about Lou that came across was she was very passionate and cared a great deal about what she was speaking to. But she has a very unusual position, and you tell me it's the only one that you're aware of within the banking industry.
Right.
So maybe you could explain the title and just a little synopsis
Sure.
of what exactly that means.
I go out in the community and I teach financial literacy. So my whole job is to educate. I'm not talking about specifics of a checking, specifics of a savings, just the basics as to what type of vehicle it is, how do you use it. I deal with kindergartners through senior citizens. And the bank was nice enough to recognize that this is an area that needs to be handled. So education is my main thing, and it is to avoid some of the things, that you mentioned with the cold, the impersonal. I want to be in the community to show them that we are people. For most of the people, and I appreciate you blindsiding us with this video, I thought it was great. However, one of the things for most people, they get upset over what Enron is doing, over what the big banks do. But for most people, their local bank is where they have their contact. As long as that is agreeable, pleasant, non-rattling off of facts, I think most people are fairly happy. The problem has been with online, with everything, it's less personal. So my job is to become more personal with it. And I especially care about the senior side of it, as our population is aging. So in a nutshell, I teach about money, anything connected with banking, loans, mortgages, investments, just the basics of it, just to make them feel more comfortable with the terms and with what happens in it. So.
Okay, so let me throw this, and this isn't, we didn't prep for this, but as we're talking about financing, one of the things, and I don't know, maybe they do discuss this in high school these days, I don't know, but my wife and I are always talking about there should really be a class in high school called, Reality 101, where you go over banking. You just go over how to attain the best loan, so forth and so on. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being very prepared and very educated, regardless of, let's say, educational level, what do you find with the consumers when it comes to the basics of financing or finances or investments? My 2 cents is that I think a lot of people, at least I, feel so overwhelmed with all the choices and the phrasing and the things that these two guys are talking about. You just get so overloaded. You're just like, just give me a pen and I'll sign this, and I got things to do.
Right. So last week, when we went to the high school, we were trying to give information that they did not get at home and they had not gotten at the school, just on how to proceed once they get out of high school. So this is what I spend a lot of my time doing. It's a lot of material, and I don't want to overwhelm them.
Sure.
So we were just going over basic things that they need to think about once they get through high school.
Gotcha.
It's a whole different world.
Gotcha.
And they're thrown into it, basically.
Yep.
So anything in my job I can do to make that easier, that's what I try to do.
Outstanding. And a needed service for sure. John, you and I were talking a little bit about, in particular, senior fraud. And I worked in the detective unit for a while, and unfortunately, for I think a number of reasons, senior fraud was prevalent, and there are a number of reasons for that, I think, which we can discuss later on. But with regard to your position in the bank, can you give us kind of a, nothing obviously is typical, but can you give us a typical story that might come to your attention, how you deal with it on your end once it comes to your attention, and maybe just touch on a little bit what the bank, especially the Bank of Ann Arbor, tries to do with regard to protecting. I mean, there's only so much we can do, right, with regard to a consumer, and I understand that, but with regard to educating them, if you will.
Okay.
So
a typical situation could be, I have an employee call me about a senior depositing what the employee thinks is an unusual check into their account. It could be suspicious looking. The employee probably thinks it's part of a scam, and that's why they're calling me. So the first thing I do is I go to a look back on the account, and I look back about 6 to 12 months. I'm looking for unusual activity or similar transactions, similar deposits on that account. So if they contact me in March 2016, I'll go back to March 2015, and I'll look for a similar deposit. So this happened recently where the employee called, it was an unusual check. I went back to March 2015, customer deposited the same check. So that was not unusual, however, the employee thought it was. The look back also lets me become familiar with the customer's banking habits, what their bills are, and what they're paying. So if there is fraud on the account, I can catch it quicker that way. I pull copies of statements, checks, the signature card, and their debit card activity if there's a debit card on the account. Obviously on the checks, I compare the signature to the signature card, but on debit card activity, I look at the time the debit card was used. So if I'm seeing a transaction on a senior's debit card at 1:30 in the morning, that's probably not going to be legitimate, unless it was Lou, at the Fleetwood.
and knowing Lou for so little time, that's probably true. Good point, John.
But if I'm looking at a college student's account, debit card activity at 1:30 in the morning, that's not going to be unusual at all. Once I have everything together, I have somebody at the branch try to contact the customer. I'll contact the branch. Does anybody know this customer? A lot of times the customers use the same branch, so our employees would be familiar on a first-name basis with them. If I don't have an employee who can contact them, then I will. I'll call them on the phone, explain who I am, why I'm calling, and get the information to them to try to explain what's going on. If there's a second person on the account, which makes it easier for me if there's a son or daughter on the account, then I can contact that second person. So if I didn't get anywhere with the account owner, maybe I couldn't get them to understand it was fraud I was seeing, I can go to the second person on the account. Lou is a great resource. Lou is a new resource to us, but I can always go to Lou. She works with seniors regularly, and she talks very well, and I can go to Lou. I will also go on occasion to Adult Protective Services, and that's if I can't get the fraud to stop. Maybe the senior doesn't believe it's fraud, but I'm 100% positive it's fraud. I will file with Adult Protective Services. And finally, and this is rare, but we can decline transactions on a customer, and we've had to do this. We had a senior who was sending wire transfers out of the country.
Wow.
We talked, didn't believe they were being scammed, but we were confident they were, and so we said, we apologize, but we're unable to process any more wire transfers for you. We stopped at that one fraud.
Gotcha.
So
I had no idea. So like I said, as an officer or even as a detective, I'm going to give you a typical scenario maybe that I and we handle, and then maybe you can both comment it from your different perspectives.
Sure.
But so you have this case of fraud that develops with a senior. Usually they're remiss to come forward because they're very embarrassed. I mean, they don't even want their kids to know about it. They don't want their neighbors to know about it, regardless of the sum. So you have that. And then you have usually some sort of trust that they have established with this person that is taking advantage of them. And because seniors, I have found that they are very trusting of people. When you say you need $10,000 for this or $2,000 for that, and they are very trusting. And so for those reasons, as well as usually loneliness plays a huge role in there somewhere, because even if it's somebody overseas, they're paying attention to them, and some attention is better than no attention. And so you have all these, just those three things that jump out at me from my perspective, but they are obstacles, right, to prosecuting it, and as John just indicated, even stopping the payment. So those are the obstacles some of the obstacles that we have dealt with, and I have found to be a real handicap in trying to help them, to help themselves. So if you can comment on that aspect of it.
Well, seniors are very trusting, most of them. It's sad because it's one of the populations that has money, and generations coming up are not going to be in that position. So you mentioned a key word, which is need. What scammers do, or anyone trying to take advantage of someone, is they establish that they need that senior. And what's more important is the senior feels that they need them. As we get older, we're not always needed. So isolation is there, but also no one needs us. And we come from a generation of raising families, very hands-on, more so than today, earning a living, as a lot of males did back then, so that you are now not needed. In fact, I stopped working and I went back to work with this position because I wasn't needed. No one needed me. I had no purpose.
Sure.
So what the scammers do, especially as seniors can get cranky, their families will stay away.
Just, I
Not
want to
me,
interrupt
not
you. That
me,
doesn't include you.
Never,
Okay.
never.
Just
But their families stay away because it is difficult, and I'm not downplaying that at all.
Sure.
However, the more the family stays away, the better chance the scammer has. Or
point.
the needy person, be it a family member, which it normally is, or a caregiver, which is the other big issue. Not all, but many times. So it then becomes, to the senior, they're not losing money, they're filling a need. And we've had some horrific ones. And later I'll go over some of the particulars of it. And they've happened to some of our employees' parents. And you'd like to think if you work in a bank, you can protect. But I had a mother who lived to be 93. And we actually had a gentleman in the neighborhood who did work for her. She was in her own home. And that all went fine until he asked her for money. And my mother mentioned that to me.
Uh-oh.
And that was a mistake.
I was going to say, that was his biggest mistake.
So I showed up at his doorstep one morning before work, pulled him out to the porch, and informed him if he ever contacted my mother again, it was over. Because then what happens is they become afraid, the senior becomes afraid. And literally they've found scams and fraud can literally cause death in seniors.
I'll bet.
Because they become so fearful, they won't answer their phone, because one senior was called 450 times by a scammer.
Gracious.
So they have the time to do this, and they're going to do it. So I think a big portion of it is being needed. Someone needs me. My family doesn't need me so much anymore. And my mom used to say, I feel so alone. And we have a very close family. But Mom, we're all here. And I know what she meant.
Right.
Now I know what she meant.
I get it.
So that is a big part of it. And John sees a different side of it. But that's more what I see from the seniors. So.
Very interesting. John, maybe you can comment. So let's say I'm a caregiver. I'm the son or daughter or any other role of the senior. And you mentioned something earlier, just as an aside, to have a second person on the account is critical. So maybe you could go over some safeguards, I don't know, that's what I would call them, safeguards that if you're in this position, how you can help protect the senior. You know, I mean, that's, so we have the one idea is the second person and you could touch on that and then go into whatever else you want to discuss.
Yeah, so if there's a second person on the account, so like Lou was saying, a lot of times you can't get the senior to understand that they're being scammed. And it could be somebody who's asking them for money and they want to accommodate that person, or they feel needed at that point. You know, we can start watching those checks start filtering through the account and think, uh-oh, you know, this is a third check in this week, the senior's paid to this person. I think we're going to have a problem here. At least if there's somebody, a second person on that account, you can make that phone call to that person and say, this is what we're seeing. We haven't seen your mother or father write checks to this person ever before, and now we have 3 of them in 5 days. We don't know what it is. Could you maybe talk to your parent and ask what's going on?
Okay. And what any other things come to mind with regard to, and again, I understand that as a business, this is your customer, so you don't have carte blanche to just do whatever, because this is your customer and they have,
And it's a fine line.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's their money.
Yeah.
It's their money.
So, yeah, and I certainly appreciate that. But anything else, because again, we would have sons and daughters come to us very, very distraught over just what you're both saying, that, their mom or dad has given away $10,000 to some orphanage overseas and they never even met. So anything else that people can do as they're watching this to help safeguard as best they can? And it sounds like you guys are really on top of it, and I had no idea that
And most
that
banks are.
Yeah,
Most banks
that
are.
banks were monitoring all this. Okay.
A lot of times I find the seniors are lonely, so when I call them, they're willing to talk to me, and I have all their information in front of me. I mean, I'm not asking them for personal information, but I can understand how when they answer that call, that if somebody's paying attention to them, they're going to warm up to that person very fast.
Gotcha. So what I hear you both saying without saying it is, and I touched on it, is that loneliness for seniors is critical in addressing that is with regard to issues like this. And I guess that's outside of maybe all our realm, but there are a number of opportunities, whether it's volunteering or so forth. But
And one of the things they've found is, through studies, is that as we age, our cognitive skills reduce.
I can testify to that.
So I have noticed a couple times myself, not very often, but just once in a great while. However, our belief in our financial abilities tends to increase.
Oh, interesting.
Because we've handled money for a lot of years. What do you mean I don't know how to do this? So that can become an issue too. It's again partly losing one more thing that a senior can't do.
Yeah.
Now you're pointing out one more thing I can't do.
Right.
So that becomes an issue too. A lot of it is, and I know it's hard with the police officers because they have other calls to make. So they go in on a call and it's fast.
Right.
One of the things Tom and I have talked about is when a police officer walks in to someone's home, they're normally going to see someone who looks like me. We outlive the men, so you're probably going to run into a woman. She's going to be short, and she's not going to weigh a lot, and she's going to have white hair. And now we have an officer who walks in, who's 6'2", has on a uniform, has a little gadget up here that goes off, has a gun, and we're going to talk to each other this way.
Yeah. Good point. Valid point.
So that creates a burden right there. At the bank, I've tried to, when I have a senior with me, I sit on the same side of the desk with the senior rather than across the desk.
Gotcha.
I did try that one time with a gentleman who had Alzheimer's, and he became extremely agitated. So that is not always the best thing to do.
Gotcha.
But you have to go on the senior. It's a slow process. None of this happens quickly. It's a slow process. The problem we have at the bank is by the time a senior comes in, to get $25,000 in cash, and this is what happens, $10,000 in cash. Wow. They're already convinced, and now they want to take action. They want to move on it. About all we can do is try to stall the best we can, because many times, if you stall, the person tends to think about it.
Gotcha.
The other thing that we do try not to do is to actually say, are you being exploited? Because if you say that, now they will get defensive. Well, of course I'm not stupid. However, if you say, have any of your friends been exploited? Have you heard anyone talking about this? And the more you talk, I had a lady that was in a pigeon drop, which is a case where they're contacted saying, we can get a whole bunch of money if we just show a little money for good faith. And this was back years ago. So she came in and wanted a lot of cash. So the teller talked to her and got me, and I talked to her. And I finally said, well, why don't we just sit in the lobby here? How about a cup of coffee? We'll just chat. So we kept chatting. And knowing full well the person who had brought her to the bank was going to be leaving. So the longer she sat, the more you could see it in her little eyes. She knew. So I finally said, and my fear was there was someone at her home waiting for us. So I said to her, why don't I give you a ride home? And let's call the Ann Arbor Police Department first. And let's have them meet us there. So we did, and it was okay, but I told her, I said, you tell every friend of yours what's happened to you. Because that's the only way you're going to protect your friends. But usually they're embarrassed, so they don't want to do it. One other briefly thing. When seniors get calls at home, it's like any of us. It takes us off guard. We're not prepared. So we don't really know what to say. And as a senior, you're polite, normally. My mom, she had a card next to her phone.
Okay.
we wrote down what charities she had given to, because they were calling 5 and 6 times. And my mother was a giver.
Sure.
So she could say to them, when they said charity and they said donation, she could say, just a moment, let me look at my list.
Excellent.
Well, I gave to you in March, so I won't be giving again. The same can be said of a card at the front door. Because when someone comes to your door, it throws you. And I had an episode happen to me in my home, and afterwards I thought, I didn't lose any money, but I thought, what the heck?
Right.
What did I just do?
No, I get it.
So all of those things, there are things you can do, but you have to be kind of resourceful for it and base it on the individual.
And it sounds like from what both of you are saying, I mean, it's no huge epiphany to anybody sitting here, but that it really does take the involvement of, a good friend or a family member to immerse themselves in their lives to some degree.
Right.
It doesn't really do any good to stand on the outside and chastise them and berate them for decisions that were made yesterday or today, but rather.
And there are ways of showing respect
Yeah.
for the senior. Let them keep their dignity, but there are probably ways we can work around this. So that's one of the things I try to teach when I go out.
Gotcha. Okay, we're almost ready to take a break, but before we do that, let's watch a second clip here. All right, so a lot of the audience right now is saying, what is Monty Python? But let's bypass that. In its day, it was hilarious. It's still hilarious. But why do I pick that particular skit? The best part, the highlight of the whole clip for me is when he says, it's $1 for a gift. And the banker says, a what? All right, because again, sorry, but that kind of typifies, I know Lou. I know Lou's struggling over here. And again, as a serious, let's put a serious thing here. I do very much appreciate what both of you do being here today. And a lot of what we're talking about is just kind of funny, my little thing on banking. But that impersonal, there's that impersonal thing again, where this guy is advocating for the orphanage, and he gets a guy who's trying to make the dollars and cents work out for him, and it's not computing, and I thought it was hilarious. All right, so sorry. Sorry for the humor. Not really. Okay, John, you and I were talking a little bit at break, and there I go. See, did you catch that just now?
I didn't, sorry.
So what would be your best advice with regard to those who have experienced a fraud? And then the second part of that would be, what are things that you commented on? What are some of the things that anyone can put in place that isn't going to cost money, that's going to protect your finances?
Okay. First one would be to change the passwords on your accounts. The longer, the better.
Okay, and when you say that, they say, what is it, 3 months? I don't know. 3 months? That you're supposed to change every 6 months? Whatever.
He's talking longer as far as the letters.
Right, but I mean, don't they say every 3 months or something? Now, see, it's rules like that, John, that I'm like, oh my goodness.
I think they're
man.
Tom rules.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I think it's
I'm
okay.
pretty
Sorry.
certain they're Tom rules.
I digress.
How about we change them regularly?
Okay.
That we're not giving you a time period that way.
Okay, I like that.
Okay.
See, you see how the banking industry doesn't work with you, with someone like me. Go ahead, John.
The longer, the better, the password. For example, a good password would be maybe the year, make, and model of your first vehicle. So make that the password on your one of your accounts. 1972 Ford Maverick.
That's good.
You have letters, you have numbers, you have capital letters in there. For your next account, because you don't want to use the same password for all accounts, maybe make it your second car. Check your account regularly online, and that means just going online, signing in, and looking at the last few transactions on your account.
Let's stop right there for me. How many people now do you think have an online account that is, they're able to do exactly what you're saying without regard to, age or anything? I mean, is it the younger generation more than the older?
Yes.
Is it? Okay.
It is.
I mean, I have found it to be extremely helpful to have the online, but I do know people that refuse. The only way they'll do banking is inside the bank. So, anyway.
And when we get to seniors, though, you're going to see less online banking accounts.
Okay.
And it kind of makes sense, though.
Right.
But the sooner you see it and the quicker you notify us, the better. Order a copy of your credit report. You get a free one annually. Order it and review it, look it over. If you see somebody's ordered credit in your name, you have a problem.
Okay, now what would that look like? If somebody ordered a credit report, it'll say, credit report ordered?
The best place to get a annual credit report is the website annualcreditreport.com, and it's from the federal government.
Okay, okay.
So once you get that bureau, and that's what everything is based on now, your insurance premiums, your credit score, your rent, all of it. So once you get that, feel free to come into a bank and talk with a lender about how to read it. And they can help you look at it and know how to read it. There's a lot of resources online, but the problem is who has the time to look it up.
Right. Good point.
So, know somebody at your bank and just go in. Most offices have a lender of some sort there. Have them look at it
Gotcha.
with
Okay.
You would recognize, too, if you saw a Visa was open in January 2006 and you didn't order a Visa, you'd recognize that right away by looking at your credit report.
Sure.
Shred your checks and statements. We've been telling people that for 20 years. To shred those, I'll still get the occasional person who won't shred it and they'll throw them in the recycle bin. So you just opened that up to everybody when you do something like that. Don't think you won't become a victim again. They pick everybody. If you've been a victim once, they're going to try you again. They try law enforcement. They try me. I had, this was last week, I had 3 calls in 2 days from the IRS threatening to throw me in jail on my bank-issued cell phone.
Right.
They don't care who they're calling.
Right.
And one of the best pieces of advice I heard was from actually an FBI seminar earlier this year, and he said if you didn't initiate the phone call, hang up.
I like that.
There's nothing wrong with hanging up on that if you didn't initiate it. So
That makes sense. So as we got about 5 minutes to our next clip, and obviously we can't, I wish we could cover everything there is to be covered, but hopefully we're giving you enough information, and there will be resources that I'll post at the end of the show up on the screen, numerous, thanks to both of our guests here. But having said all that, what caveat would you give people, just one thing that would stick maybe with anybody out there with regard to senior fraud or fraud in general, if they don't do anything else, that we've suggested or talked about here, what one caveat would you leave them with? Lou?
Pay attention.
What does that mean?
Pay attention means it's your account. Don't assume everything is okay. You are responsible for your account. It isn't anyone's fault but yours if you're not paying attention to your account. So you can say, I never balance my account. I don't know that that's such a good thing.
Gotcha. No, I agree. I
Because
totally agree
that
with you.
gives someone the opportunity.
Please don't follow my. Please
no,
don't follow
no,
my
please
example.
don't. Please don't follow him.
Please. My poor accountant wife, when we got married, was
The poor
appalled.
woman,
Anyhow,
the poor woman. But what you do is you pay attention. It's your responsibility.
Right.
It's not the bank's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's yours. And I tell all students that. You are responsible. Pay attention to it.
it's a good caveat.
You know, think about what you're giving out. You go online, you give information. Think about it. It's
and
out
we
there.
and we talked a little bit at break. We've got about 3 minutes left, but for the student who has traditionally lived home, they're on their own,
Right.
and you have all this. I know they're besieged with financial offers for credit cards,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, what one piece of advice would you give a student just coming into the financial world and a little overwhelmed and so forth, other than pay attention?
And to go slowly. Don't try to do it all at once. Start small. Get used to seeing things. A lot of parents will say to me, the kids don't even know how to write a check. No, and they never will, because that's not how they do their banking.
That's
So
the
you
point.
go online, and you don't deal in cash, you don't walk in a bank, but you have to pay attention to, now you're totally responsible, totally. And you have to take your time, go slowly. In fact, the two young ladies at the University of Michigan are preparing an app on financial literacy to have
Oh,
on your
wow.
phone.
Now that is
Mm-hmm.
an excellent idea. Okay.
So, but that's the main thing, is that just because it's online, you have to pay actually even more attention. It's a harder way to do it.
And before I forget, I want to make sure that folks have what's your best contact line there for them to reach you directly?
It would be through the main office of the bank, and then just ask for me,
Okay.
for Lou Morse. I have an office at the Ellsworth office of Bank of Ann Arbor, and I'm usually there too. So,
Okay.
but yeah, anybody at the bank, if you just mention financial literacy, they'll get you to me.
Outstanding position. Very good call, Bank of Ann Arbor to do that. Any last thoughts, John, along the same lines, that is to say, one final piece of advice, one caveat to anybody with regard to the numerous topics we've talked about today?
I want to back up a little on this, but review your account.
Okay.
I love it when a customer calls me on their own and said that they see a transaction that just happened on their account.
Okay.
They should get an award for doing that.
I got you. And just as an aside, let's suppose you don't online bank, you refuse for whatever reason. Can they? I don't know how this works. Do they call the bank and then you have a password? I mean, you obviously don't know who you're dealing with, so how do you verify who you're talking to? Do they have to come in?
We have certain ways, questions
Okay,
we ask,
okay,
and that
I
type of
figured
thing.
that.
But it is a more difficult way to
Yeah.
do it. If you would come in the bank, we can print off things for you. We can do different things for you as long as we know that's who you are. But the whole privacy issue is just so huge now.
Yeah.
Because even just changing an address
Sure.
opens a whole can of worms. So that's why you can think we're giving you a hard time. We're being protective, and that's what
Absolutely.
we're charged with doing. So,
Absolutely.
and please, through this, please, no one bank the way Tom does, and no one look at your financial information.
Okay, so it's much like when I was raising my children. Pay attention to what I say, not what I do. Anyhow, last word, John, and then we're going to cut to a film. But with regard to what Lou was saying, and I completely lost my
There
frame.
you go. That's
It's gone.
impressive.
It's gone. I don't even
Yeah.
know where I was going with that. So forget it.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
John.
Well.
Hopefully I'll remember. Let's cut to this last clip here, but we'll be back.
Is there a cash register left? Just one where you can buy something and immediately walk out the door without dealing with this whole thing? Do you have a rewards card? No. And I'm begging you that this be the end of this conversation. I have money which says legal tender on it, and I have the amount it says on that tag. If I could just give you the money and you release the item, we could do it simultaneously if you need, Indiana Jones style, because I can see the door. I'm so close. Sunlight streaming in. I'm hearing birds chirping. Please release me back into a world of joy. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm required to turn this into a hostage situation. Tell you about our rewards card program. You're going to love listening to every word of this. First of all, it's very easy to get one. I pull a clipboard out from under the counter while people wait in line behind us. And I get so much information from you, your brain will quiver and quake. I'm going to get your home address, your work information, home number, work number, cell number, primary email address, and a secondary email address. Make sure you fill out the secondary email address portion of the application in case we send out an email blast for 5 cents off on one of our items. If that gets bounced back from the primary, if you filled out the secondary, basically it's for your protection. So you're not missing out on these life-altering financial opportunities. And if you join today, get 10% off your initial purchase and 5% off each subsequent, all your future purchases. Do you have a full price card where people pay full price? They walk out the door and they get to watch their children grow up? I want to be with them. I want to watch my kids play soccer. I don't want to stand next to cash registers saving hypothetical nickels for the rest of my life.
Sorry. All right, cops aren't supposed to laugh. I thought it was hilarious. By the way, John, I just remembered as we were watching that clip. So, getting back to the online thing, then I'll do the tip of the day, so to speak. But when it comes to online banking, I think most people, my guess would be, they're intimidated because it's technology, or they don't feel it's safe. So you can't do anything about their lack or fear of technology, I guess. But with regard to it being safe, that is online banking, what can you tell us about it?
You're out of my league on that one, buddy.
Okay, that's fair. And that's why I like these guys. Both of you really sincerely appreciate you being
Thank
here
you.
today. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm not being paid for this advertisement.
No, he's not.